1932, Joe Grew from Harvard University was out on Alkali Ridge, as he called it, with the crew doing some excavations that were designed to learn more about the Pueblo II period and try and figure that out. And while they were excavating one of the sites, one of his crew members, really his right-hand man, Al Lancaster, wandered off. That's really the only explanation we have. You can speculate why he might wander away for a few minutes. And was wandered off from this site, and a little ways away, came across this amazing site. It was like nothing they'd ever seen before. Red pottery everywhere. Obviously just earth and construction, no big rubble mounds for the most part. Although at one end of this, so just this big long site, strange pottery, and at one end of it, a nice little Pueblo II ruin sitting on top of this earthen architecture, which was a gold mine to them, in a sense. In terms of their original research design of figuring out Pueblo II and figuring out the whole sequence of things, hey, we've got, I mean, you can tell there was stratigraphy, right? You've got one building on top of another. And so they diverted some attention to it at the end of the 1932 field season. They dug a few rooms. Those excavations proved to be really productive in terms of producing lots of material information and so on. And so in 1933, they went back and spent the whole field season there. And that was the site that they called Site 13, Alkali Ridge Site 13. One of the bowls they found served as sort of the model for the T-shirt design. And I became really interested in this site when I was working on the ceramics for the Animus La Plata project, which Site 13, at least the major part of it, dates to the late 700s. And on the Animus La Plata project, it's quite some ways to the east, over by Durango, Colorado. But there's a large concentration of sites there that dates to about the same time period, certainly in the late 700s, and then continues on probably into the early 800s. And the ceramics there are really, really different, although we do have some red wares, and I'll tell you more about that stuff tonight when we talk about neutron activation and that I've been doing with red wares. But the comparison of ceramics was really intriguing to me, and I managed to scratch some money and I went back to Harvard and looked at the whole vessels and started looking at notes. And as I got into looking at notes and photographs and things, I came to appreciate the impression. They dug 100 and I forget the number, like 130 surface rooms. Most of those are storerooms. They dug some surface habitation rooms that are out in front of these storerooms. But I sort of had always had the impression that they just dug the whole site. And it kind of looks like that when you look at the map. I mean, there's just long rows of excavated rooms. But as I got into the notes and photographs, I came to appreciate that they hadn't actually dug the whole site. In fact, there's a lot of stuff out there that's unexcavated. And I had some questions. One of the questions was they dug, 100 and some storage rooms, and I forget exactly. This is where I get in trouble by doing this extemporaneously because the numbers are not in my head. But in one part of the site, they dug a series of contiguous surface habitation rooms that they're also contiguous with the storerooms. But through most of the site, if you look at Crew's site map, they just sort of dashed in lines, which was a signal that, hey, habitation rooms are probably here, but we didn't even look for them or something. And so one of the questions I had was, were those habitation rooms there or not? Were they, were they just so badly eroded that they couldn't deal with them because they had shallower floors and things? And a variety of other questions as well. So after stewing over this for a few years, I finally pulled myself together and wrote a research design and got a permit to go excavate in 2012, 2013. It's been pretty small scale work that I've done out there, sort of cobbling together crews of a few students and lots of volunteers, and without whom we couldn't have done anything at all. But what we've done, we went back into some of the first rooms that they excavated at the end of that 1932 field season down at the south end of the site, which were the ones you could see the best, and they clearly were in need of some sort of preservation work. They hadn't been backfilled. The slabs falling over at weird angles and stuff. That seemed like a good place to start, so we began in 2012 by re-excavating 3 storage rooms that Brew had excavated. And that turned out to be really kind of an interesting exercise. For one thing, I can tell you, and this totally surprised me, but 8 years is long enough for the dirt to get really, really hard. It basically was just, they shoveled the back dirt out to the sides, and the back dirt kind of washed back in, and just, you know, that dirt could have been there 800 years as well as 80 years. It just wasn't all that different from digging stuff for the first time. But as we re-excavated the rooms, we discovered a few things. Like, they never excavated the post holes, and some of those post holes still had wood in them. I'd really like to know if they'll date or not, but apparently I'm going to have to wait another year or 2 for the tree lab to tell me. Because it's only been 2 years so far that they've had it. They also left the groundstone lying on the floor, right? So there's photographs of the room with you know, a mono lying on the floor, and we excavate the room. The mono's not quite where it is in the photograph, but it's clearly the same mono. So that was kind of interesting. And then, so we excavated those 3 rooms. We started into one unexcavated storage room right off the end of those 3 in 2012. We finished it up in 2013. That was pretty interesting in that the room had clearly burned. All the rooms that Brew excavated, the ones we re-excavated, had burned. But the room burned. There was a little Bajo red on orange bowl sitting on the floor, just this little tiny thing. A smashed pot on the floor that I kind of think had been hanging from the roof. It's a little hard to be sure of that. But it was full of sand, and then there were some lithic flakes in there that were being stored inside the jar. We trenched south of those rooms, which is where the habitation room should have been, and got into some really interesting stratigraphy. The habitation room, there's a floor. In the stratigraphy, there's sort of a burned roof zone, and then there's this little layer of sand, and then on top of it, this dense black fill is just chock full of corn that's back dirt from the 1932 excavations. So they shoveled a ton of corn out of those storerooms and just left it in the back dirt. They did collect some corn. They didn't collect any from these rooms. The field notes just say something like much corn or something. And yes, there's much corn. I continually joke, and it's not really a joke, that I have so much that I can't count it in terms of, mostly it's kernels. There's a few cobs. But literally, I've tried to talk a couple of people into counting it for me, and there's no takers yet. I mean, just bags and bags of corn. We actually stopped screening for the most part. Well, at least not thoroughly screening that. We just would throw it on the screen, let the little stuff fall through, and we bagged it up, picked out the artifacts too that we could see. Then we bagged it up and took it back up to Provo and ran it on the float machine to get all the corn out. Because we were spending hours picking corn out of the screen. It was just incredible. Okay, so south of those rooms, so we hit the habitation rooms. Our trench actually ran south pretty much from what Brew called room 75, and ran right across the top of a metate sitting on the floor with the mono still sitting in the trough, sitting right next to a slab-lined fire pit. This was just in our first trench. We ran it south. We still haven't quite figured out what's going on with the south wall of that thing. We never found one. We got far enough out that we should have probably found it, and there's a big pit out there. I don't know. There's more work to do there. But we expanded kind of laterally out from the trench, and we've now excavated pretty good chunks of 2 surface habitation rooms that are pretty well preserved. The one our original trench was in actually turns out to have at least 3 metates in it. We still haven't excavated quite half of it, probably. There's 3 metates down on or near the floor. The next room over, we got into that, and it was just full of corn. I mean, this is not the back dirt, right? So the back dirt up here full of corn. Then there's the sand that's kind of the old ground surface, and then below that we're into the undisturbed fill. And there's a bunch of corn in that in the roof fall, and then right down on the floor there's piles of corn. That's just incredible. So you can see why they after their initial test, they went back and spent the whole 1933 field season there. There's just material everywhere. I didn't even mention the reconstructible vessels out of the habitation room, a couple of grayware jars, and again, we haven't completely excavated these rooms, we just have pieces of them. The other major thing we've done is the largest pit structure on the site that Brew excavated. It's about 60 square meters. It's really clearly a communal structure. The map actually shows, and I know we don't have the maps and I don't have the slide, but there's kind of a dashed line showing that in the northeast portion of the structure that they hadn't, that they'd left unexcavated fill there. And so we decided to go in there and try and trench through that unexcavated fill. There was some, this structure is amazing in several ways. It has these incredible floor features, some of which look like the things that Rich Wells uses, at least calls them roof sipapus, sort of floor vault kinds of things. So there's one of these just kind of north of the hearth that I think is hold F. And then just north of that, there's a little stone-lined feature, kind of where a sipapu, or sort of a single sipapu ought to be. But it's this like stone box set into the ground with a little tunnel into it. And then off to the northwest, pointing in, and the tunnel thing points straight back toward the hearth and towards this, really I guess they're pointing towards this thing that looks like a roof sipapu to hold up. But then off to the northwest, there's a circular pit with a tunnel into it, and the tunnel sort of points back towards that. And if you look on the map, the dashed line showing the unexcavated fill goes past another very similar feature in the northeast of that feature. It turns out that they didn't actually excavate back and expose that feature, though. It looks like what they did is they said, okay, we've got this here, we've got there, I wonder if there's another one here. And they tunneled in. And this is something, it's very clear in the photographs, but you can't tell it from the report at all. So they tunneled under this unexcavated fill, so there's like 2 meters well, 1.5 meters of fill up above, and then this little tunnel back where they thought this feature should be, and there it was, right? This little pit with the kind of tunnel going into it. And when we went back into it to excavate, we didn't know exactly where our trench was going. You could kind of see where the unexcavated fill was, but it was pretty hard to figure out exactly where things were, so we just sort of picked a spot that looked good, ran the trench, and we actually came down on top of hole F, which had a completely buried dead tree lying on top of it. The site was changed in the 1960s, which was probably, I hope the BLM wouldn't do that these days. But, and in fact, as far as I can tell, the reason that the site is now a National Historic Landmark, as far as I can tell, the reason that it's now a National Historic Landmark is that the BLM changed the site while Joe Brew was on the committee that got to decide what became a National Historic Landmark. And so I think it was like a year later that suddenly it was a National Historic Landmark. But in any case, our trench came down right on the edge of this thing that looked like the roof sipapu, hold F, and right over the top of so we actually cut right through the part where they tunneled under the fill, got it in profile, came down on top of that weird feature. Brew thought that what they'd done, the floor of that big pit structure sits right on this really soft bedrock, and the subfloor features are all dug into it. And Brew thought they'd actually dug a tunnel through that soft bedrock to create that weird feature. But when we got there, we actually wound up that there was a little bit of clay floor over the top. Take that off, and what they've done is it's a pit with like a trench into it and a mono set there, and then plastered over. So that was kind of interesting to find. We got back to the wall. And again, these are details that maybe don't matter all that much. I get into it looking at it, but the structure, the pit structure is unusual in that it actually had an interior wall. There's sort of a ring of post holes around it, so that the edge of the pit is not the wall. But there's a post holes in front. And Brew had described this as post holes sort of close to set. They're about this far apart, and in between horizontal pieces of wood, adobe'd over. We got back to the wall in our trench. We hit a couple of those post holes, and the adobe collar is there for sure down at floor level, but no sign of the horizontal piece of wood, at least when we hit it. But our trench is only, it's a trench, so there's more to look at there. There's still a lot of unexcavated fill. So Trimming Lab has some pieces of wood. I still have some boxes sitting in the hall outside my office that I probably should mail off one of these days, but they're so slow, it's not much incentive to really rush things. But I think we'll be able to get some more dates and lots and lots of information. Ceramics that we collected are in this big neutron activation study that I'm just completing. So it's been really interesting to get in and look at that site. Anyone wants to see it, there's still space on the field trip on Sunday. That's probably all I should say.